Hello, friends. It's Binge O'Clock, the podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle and Joy, and I've seen almost nothing.
And this week, we watched Almost Human, Episode 8, You Are Here, which was supposed to be Episode 2.
Yep. We'll get into that.
And it shows.
To put it lightly.
In this episode, it's a bit of a long summary, so bear with me, listeners. When a bullet can kill you from anywhere, Kennex and Dorian need to shut down that tech connection before it can get into the hands of some gnarly criminals. Kennex is working on his anger issues, and if you couldn't hear, those were giant quotation marks I was making, and finally gives Stahl his phone number. Also, Dorian gets shot a bunch and speaks Korean for about a third of the episode. But and Danielle and I were talking about this before we started recording, but like every time he gets shot, his language center is like the first thing to go. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's just funny because he's an android.
Right. Or
like, is it played for laughs?
I'm not really sure what that is. Or it's like he can still function, he just can't communicate. Also, we have to talk about that phone number because I'm still not convinced that that is what Kennex gave Valerie. But I do think it makes sense.
It makes sense if this was the second episode.
Exactly. But we cannot let ourselves talk about the episode order yet.
I know.
First, we have to talk about tech.
What weren't the cops prepared for this week, Danielle?
Okay, the first few things I'm going to mention are not things cops were not ready for. They are simply pieces of technology I feel like need to be called out in the episode.
Which were memorable and worth talking about.
Such as, for example, when Kennex is in his anger management class, everyone is drinking coffee out of paper cups. The coffee clearly came from something that looks kind of like a Keurig, but all of the coffee is being delivered to them by a coffee drone that has just a tray on its back.
But a Keurig is like the easiest thing to make coffee with.
So the drone doesn't even have arms. How did the cup go from the Keurig onto the back of the little tray drone?
The drone doesn't even have opposable thumbs.
Like, the Keurig should it should be a coffee producing robot that walks around. None of it makes sense. I thought it was funny.
That's true. It should have been a walking Mr. Coffee.
Yes.
Where it's just like you press a button and then the little robot waits and then a door opens and there's your coffee.
And there's your coffee because the Keurig is the robot. But no, there's a whole separate Keurig. They use paper cups and the drone only.
In the next 30 some odd years, get on that walking coffee bot. I think there's something to that.
Yeah. Okay.
You're welcome. That one's for free.
We have to call out the show yet again for talking about bitcoins.
Bitcoin. There are no Bitcoin.
Yes, exactly. When Kennex and Dorian are looking through the safety deposit box to see what, I can't even remember his real name, but I know his bank name was Max Cross. Yes. To see what Max Cross was hiding in the safety deposit box, they say, no bitcoins here, so he wasn't hiding any money.
Bitcoins.
Is about all I have to say to that. And the last thing that the police officers used in this episode were these little baby drones that were just kind of buzzing about and scanning people as they exited the crime scene.
Well, specifically, they were scanning Dorian because Dorian had gotten shot, but seemed, for all intents and purposes, to be cool with it, except for just speaking Korean for a little while.
Yes.
But it was like, it asked him to stand, asked him to turn around, and then was like, have a great day, but also said 3 other very interesting things.
That's true. Well, so it scans Dorian. And see, the reason I think that these little baby drones buzz around the perimeter of every, not crime scene, but do you know what I mean? Like when the police...
No, but like person walking away from a crime scene?
Yeah, like any person...
Like, quote-unquote victim?
Exactly. Like any person who walks away from a crime scene, or even if there's press that's gathering, or maybe if there are spectators, I imagine these baby drones just kind of keep up the perimeter and make sure that everyone is staying away. Because after the baby drone scans Dorian, the baby drone says, "Thank you for your cooperation, and remember, hugs, not drugs." It also, just kind of as it's buzzing by, tells Dorian, "Stay on this side of the wall and respect authority."
So creepy.
So creepy. Stay on
creepy.
this side
And
of
also,
the
they
wall.
mentioned the wall.
The wall! What is the wall?
So that makes 4?
4.
In your tally?
4 mentions of the wall that they refuse
4
to explain to me.
Of the wall. I mean, as you yourself have pointed out, the different clues that they've listed for, like, how the world is probably pretty boned at this point. Don't want to know what's beyond the wall.
I don't want to know what's beyond the wall. I don't like that there are little buzzy drones that gently remind you to respect authority. I don't like that the entire public is constantly surveilled by all of these different drones. The bridge cam and the subway lobby cam footage that were regularly available. I mean, listen, we're going to get into that when we get into the magic bullet. Before we get to the magic bullet, let's call out one thing the police officers were certainly, or have certainly not been on top of, just kind of in this world, and that is the scrubbers, which are, and the memory shops that are located in the Colne district.
Well, the Colne district is actually another district from the district the precinct's in. I'm trying to figure out the Hunger Games rules. Which number is the Colne district? Is it 12? Is it District 12?
No, because District 12 must be outside this proverbial wall.
Right. It has to be outside the wall.
It's got to be outside the wall. The Colne district is just, I don't know, I guess it's downtown and things happen that are outside the authorities' purview.
Like the not Little Asia something.
I know.
It's always coded Asian, and I'm just like, do you have to?
It's always coded Asian. But man, those scrubbers and the memory shops are a real issue.
It feels like a place where desperate people go to figure out their lives, right? And it wasn't this particular place. It's adjacent to where we initially see Kennex. Like, we first meet Kennex in a tube with a recollectionist. But this isn't that. This is like you're in a dentist chair and you've got like electrodes strapped to your forehead and you may or may not be scrubbed of your entire memory. I don't know if they could be selective.
It seems like they could be selective because Kira wanted them to erase just everything she knows about Anton and to specifically extract those memories. So, you know, she would still have her relationship with Amy, her daughter, and she would still have her best friend. It was very clearly not well regulated. Happening underground, as it were. It also kind of, as it was flashing through the different rooms, it did show someone who was looking at a screen and just sobbing hysterically at whatever they were seeing. So the whole thing was strange. And I also thought it was strange that Kennex came out as being very against scrubbing when literally 30 minutes ago, not 30 minutes ago, but, you know, in the previous episode, as the show was written, he was at a recollectionist's.
He was there.
In that
He was 3 doors down. He was around the corner. Like,
But the idea that you can not only relive memories, but also have selective memories scrubbed is an interesting thing to introduce to this world.
yeah. It's very, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind.
100%. What a traumatic movie.
Hard vibes. Yes. We will not be watching that on Tuesdays.
No.
It's too intense. Besides, you've seen it already.
With
So
that,
yes,
though,
what other pieces of tech?
Well, I think those were all of the smaller ones. At this point, we should just discuss the magic bullet. TM.
Yeah, the magic bullet, which is, is the MacGuffin of this episode, basically uses that facial and eye recognition of all the little tiny tech cameras all around town for real-time tracking software to figure out where you are.
And usually that real-time tracking software is just following your every move to personalize advertising to you. But
We don't know what that's like at all, do we, Danielle?
Right? What's that? Technology isn't constantly listening to me and tailoring us to my...
Advertising, advertisers need work too. It definitely there's a part of me that feels like 2013, you see some of this in some other sci-fi things. I know we keep referencing Minority Report, but like there's a definitive thing in Minority Report where, spoilers, he gets a set of new eyes and the advertisers start calling him by a different name.
I kind of forgot about that. Yes.
And we've seen it in, there's plenty of other science fiction pieces. The sci-fi genre has perfected the special effect tech to show you how these things show up. Mm-hmm. Because we get some disco face on Dorian, and then we get a bunch of screens in the negative space around him that are just shouting ads at him.
So awful. One of the ads is
weird.
Actually for an orbit vacation.
It's like my nightmare. My absolute nightmare. Can I hit skip? Where's the skip button? If I wave my arms, will they go away? But so this bullet is tuned in to this kind of tracking technology. And the idea is that it can find anyone, and I think it was like miles away, you can shoot them and kill them.
Terrible.
Horrifying.
Yep.
The fact that this could get onto the black market, and like the fact that they also basically made it like its own commercial was also super gross.
Yes, the infomercial for it that, by the way, was distributed via the, quote, black site. So there's that dark web again that they aren't able to manage.
Dark web that we cannot regulate, no matter how much we try.
But the bullet, in addition to taking advantage of the real-time tracking software used for personalized advertising, has what they call these MEMS, these micro-electromechanical systems that...
I knew you would have written that down.
I did.
I literally just wrote MEMS, and I was like, Danielle will remember what that says.
That are embedded in the bullet. They're basically little active aerodynamic things that allow you to change the trajectory of the bullet so that if a shooter wants you dead, the bullet will find you. How awful.
This bullet looks like a tiny torpedo.
Oh, yeah. Really, it really is just a, quote, micro, because it's not micro, as you said, but it really is a, quote, micro homing missile.
That's exactly what it is. And I know I said this to you before the recording, but I'm still amazed this did not kill anyone else.
Yep.
Especially considering the people who are shooting this bullet are incapable of shooting anybody.
Okay, well, that's
in point blank range.
That's why this bullet only killed one person, because thankfully the villains in this episode are just wildly incompetent.
Oh my goodness.
Like, they are entirely unable to cover their tracks.
Can't shoot fish in a barrel.
Can't shoot.
There's a whole shootout in the hallway, and the only time they actually shoot anybody is when Dorian is literally advancing on them and just taking the shots because it's now point blank range.
Yep. The show also introduced a couple of limitations to these magical bullets. So the bullets can't go underground, for example. So I guess the active aerodynamics in the bullets aren't actually, well, you know what? Here's the thing though. Because if the bullet was able to kill that person who was in the subway tunnel, the bullet did that by going through a window, right? So could the bullet not go through a window, zip down a stairway and into a basement? I guess not.
One would think. I mean, there are cameras in stairwells.
I know. But whatever. The show decides that the bullet can't go underground for whatever reason. The show also decides that if a truck, or I suppose a building, is built out of titanium, then the personalized ads can't track you. So if someone is inside of a titanium structure, the bullet also can't find them.
Yeah, this was super ridiculous because it was a titanium truck. And is there no smart device in the truck? Like, does this mean that nobody gave her like a cell phone or anything, right? Like is the truck stick? Is it manual? Like, what? How? Do you just have stupid titanium trucks driving around?
Right? Or like, if anything, maybe it's that anything that's inside of the truck is the signal is contained inside the truck, so it just kind of bounces around indoors.
Right.
But they fully opened the door of the car when they were outdoors and proceeded to have a very long conversation with this woman.
A very long conversation! Get in the truck with her, at least.
The baddies should have been able to find her then. They should have been able to find her and get her right then.
Yes, I concur.
What we wanted to end with is the society in this show is so advanced that whenever people see a pen, they are amazed by it.
Yes, this arcane instrument known as a pen.
I love when the girlfriend, Kira, pulls out the pen at the end and she has this whole flourish. We write notes to each other, ... in pen. And Kennex is just like, like it's just the most romantic, old-fashioned thing that one could do. Can you believe it? A pen.
A pen, and on paper.
And on paper, no less. Now, that was amazing because that leads very nicely into Kennex and Valerie.
Here it is, friends. We finally got to our episode-specific nonsense, which, and I know we said we would save this. We said we were going to try not to talk about the order of these episodes until our wrap-up at the end. However, this episode is impossible to discuss without the fact that it should have been number 2 in the viewing order because
we couldn't help ourselves.
There's so many things that happen in this episode that are so obviously an episode 2 thing. For example, Kennex gives Valerie Stahl his number.
Wait, but Joy, even if it's episode 2, they work together. She calls him regularly. She has his number. It doesn't make sense.
I know.
Well, I get it as a gesture, I guess. Like, oh, it's so romantic. I found a piece of paper. And when he pulls out the pen and Valerie goes, a pen?
She literally gasped about the pen. Here's... Maybe it wasn't. I know you want to believe that wasn't her number. And maybe it wasn't.
Or it was.
I don't want to really speculate what else he could have written.
Thank you for the energy, Chew.
Thank you for the energy, Chew. Maybe. There's other stuff, though, that definitely tells us this should have been episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
Kennex's reactions to the MX is how you know it's very early Kennex, because he shoots Richard Paul's MX in the head.
Yep.
On a crowded subway platform while the police are still doing their work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are onlookers.
It is kind of odd because it's on track with his behavior in episode 1, right? Because he clearly cares nothing about these MXs. He just casually pushes one out of his car. And then he has that little speech later where he says that you can dress these machines to look like cops, but they're not cops. They're bullet catchers. So that's on track with Pilot Kennex. But the whole reason that he shoots Richard Paul's MX is that the MX is talking about Dorian in a really derogatory way and saying that Dorian is this inferior, obsolete machine whose computing power is so much less than mine, etc., so on. So it was odd, I felt. Because he's standing up for Dorian, I guess, but also doesn't care anything about MXs.
I think it's still just like you were saying in our first episode, talking about how Kennex is able to have that moment of thinking about Dorian like a person and not like a machine, almost quote-unquote immediately. And I think, well, he may not profess to love Dorian yet, but there's still time. But he does appreciate the good police work that Dorian does. And the MXs, for all of their higher tech, are still just logic machines.
True.
And that's literally what the machine is even just spewing at him before he shoots him.
Though I will say, this logic machine had the right answer. It did, though, because everyone else was like, oh, 3 holes. Obviously, this is 3 bullets. And it's the MX who says, no, these 3 holes are all from the same bullet. Here's how we know that.
But it is Dorian who's like, this can't possibly be a ricochet, though.
True. Yeah. See, they could have worked together on the case.
They could have worked together. But the MX was being too like, why are you talking to that DRN? Mm-hmm. I am obviously prettier.
Listening to, wait, I wrote this down, the rambling and illogical theories of your appropriately canceled partner. Canceled had such a different meaning to it in 2013.
Such a different meaning. It's just 8 short years ago. My goodness. Wow. Yep. Entirely different. But this also leads us into Maldonado trying to also figure out what the hell in Syndicate is after in their evidence locker. Which, again, this is episode number 8 that we are watching, but it was supposed to be episode number 2. Episode number 8 has to be, in the viewing public eye, 2 whole months into this series. And there's even the idea that, like, some time has even progressed in the show itself. We don't exactly know how much time. But, like, I got the impression that this was definitely a couple of months, possibly half a year, give or take. But no, we're still going through all this evidence for Syndicate.
But see, the only reason we feel like this is months later is because they made it episode 8. If this were episode 2, we would be like, oh, okay, you know what? The person that Maldonado's interrogating, his arm is still in a cast, right? So clearly,
that's right, his arm is still in a cast.
So clearly he hasn't healed from his injuries yet, you know? Like, oh, they're still going through the evidence in the evidence rooms. Clearly not a lot of time has gone by. So this makes sense as an episode 2. It makes absolutely no sense as episode 8, because you're exactly right. There's no reason they should still be looking through all of the evidence for this one case.
I don't know how badly you screw up. I buy that maybe they scrubbed a number on, some serial digits in the system. Or maybe they entirely screwed up the entire storage facility. In which case, yeah, it would definitely take you several months to figure out. Even if it was like the following month. If you misfile something, you shouldn't need to do an entire overhaul inventory of your warehouse. And it is it's a warehouse. Like, they have forklifts.
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense. Even if the serial numbers are scrubbed, the things on the shelves are still in some sort of order. Also, as established, they have android personnel who can literally work around the clock without sleeping or eating. There's just, you know what? It's fine. We just have to remember this was supposed to be episode 2.
This is supposed to be episode 2.
And that is why I suppose this makes sense. It also ends appropriately for episode 2, because if this were episode 2, then Kennex would have killed 1 MX per episode of the show so far. And that's why the whole episode ends with Maldonado saying, thanks for not destroying any MXs today. Because he's done it every other day in the show.
Because he's literally done it every other day in the show. And also, it makes sense for the, I believe it was episode 6? They trash an MX in that episode also, and that's where we finally get the Maldonado going, do you have any idea how much those things cost?
Right.
And that makes sense on an escalation basis of how many MXs Kennex is personally responsible for destroying.
Wait, though, he wasn't responsible for that one.
But it was in his vicinity.
It was. Because he was the officer who was supposed to be responsible in that situation.
And he's responsible for Dorian.
That MX was definitely killed by a drone that slammed him into a car or something along those lines.
Which the not Dorian set into motion this horrible Rube Goldberg device.
Yes.
That ended up crushing this MX.
These poor MXs. You know what? In the pilot, we saw them through Kennex's eyes, and that's why we were set up to not like them and to view them as bad, but now I have a real soft spot for them.
You can't help it.
I can't
mean, they
help
keep getting
it.
destroyed.
Just so casually, and no one seems to care except for Maldonado, and the only reason she cares is because they cost money. Aw, toasters.
They're so expensive. But yes, I do think now we can talk about the fact that Dorian comes to get him after his angry class. Is that what that was? Angry class?
Angry class 101.
They are starting to get chummy. They're figuring it out. And after Kennex shoots that MX, he's just like smiling at him.
It's the best smile.
Kennex is like, what? I know. Michael Ealy plays this so well because it's definitely one of those, like, when somebody finally sticks up for you and then you just get all these warm and fuzzies and he's just smirking at him and Kennex is like, what? And he's like, you like me.
It's also because, you know what? Earlier in the episode, did you catch the moment where Richard Paul says, what if I put a bullet in Dorian's head? And Kennex's response is, don't even look at Dorian.
I know.
Which was so cute, but Dorian wasn't in the room for that.
You will never know. Kennex will never tell him.
Back to though, you like me?
You like me.
Kennex is like, no, I don't.
No, I don't. Oh, that's okay. I like you too. I also it's not entirely a synth pride, but I just really like Kennex in his angry meeting. He's obviously putting on airs, of like, I'm good, I got my health, got a nice synthetic leg, I'm good.
Yep, just solid denial.
Solid wall of denial.
Not just a river in Egypt, as they say. I think the only other moment where I liked this moment and it was cute, but it was obvious that this was episode 2, is when Dorian was singing that Korean, singing that Korean pop song. And at first, Rudy was refusing to turn it off. Oh, I find it catchy and soothing. So Kennex says, if you don't do something, I'll shoot him too, which Rudy takes very seriously. And I think maybe Dorian does too, because Kennex then has to look at Dorian and kind of mouth, it's okay, I won't do it. But I think that episode, 6 or 7, Kennex wouldn't even have had to mouth anything. Like, Dorian would have known that Kennex would never shoot him.
Yes. Dorian would have known that Kennex would never in a million years shoot him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in this episode, Kennex had to tell him that. But it was still cute, and I liked it.
It was really cute. Aw. I did kind of weirdly enjoy, even though I know they can only do so much with the time they have, even though Dorian spends about a third of the episode speaking, quote-unquote, speaking Korean.
Yes, heavy quotes on that.
It's, as well as he could for probably getting the script and then hearing the words a couple of times and saying them. But no, I did find it interesting that even though John is just like, I need to be able to understand what you're saying after a while, he just kind of, they get a lot of non-verbal communication out of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm here for it.
They are great partners in this episode.
And I think that brings us to our one more thing.
All right. What was my one more thing? If I could discuss
did you not write it down?
One more thing about this episode. I mean, listeners, if you had to guess, what would my one more thing be? It is 60% of the
stalling,
time,
folks.
60% of the time, it's going to be Richard Paul. And this time it is Richard Paul yet again. I can't not harp on this man. But in this episode, he is so rude, and it comes out of nowhere. I also thought it was strange because it was this little interaction between Richard Paul and Valerie, who, as much as I dislike Richard Paul, up until this point, it actually seems like he and Valerie have a good professional relationship. Like, they work together constantly, they're partnered together constantly, and she might not like him personally, but she is also the only one who calls him Richard. Everyone else calls him Detective Paul. So clearly they're friendly, right? But in this episode, he calls her out for her family's wealth, makes this strange comment about her dad knowing how to hide money. So clearly she should know how to hide money too. And then when she kind of brushes it off, I don't think that she pushes back too hard. She just kind of brushes it off. He then makes a comment about how his family didn't have the money to genetically enhance him somehow to make him taller. They are constantly ragging on Richard for being short, which is rude.
Which is very rude.
But
he doesn't need that.
He doesn't need that. But you know what? He was rude to her first, so she's rude back and says that he's short. And then he says, well, my family didn't have the money to change the way I look, is the way he phrases it. Which at first I was like, oh, are they only talking about plastic surgery? But I guess actually if we're discussing how tall or short a person is, this is not plastic surgery. This is some kind of genetic engineering. So odd to drop it in. But really, the reason I have to call out this scene is that they really could have just lifted that whole conversation out of the episode.
It's kind of unnecessary at all.
Absolutely no bearing on anything else that happens. There was no hiding of money, as they found out when they looked in the safety deposit box and there were no bitcoins. And so they didn't learn anything there either. It could have just been lifted right out of the script. What was that doing there?
I can address at least how weird that might be for him to say something along the lines that she was like genetically engineered or enhanced. I wonder if that also is a product of the fact that it's episode 2 and they're trying to introduce these characters as quote unquote quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And introducing the concept that someone is able to be enhanced without too many spoilers definitely comes into play in a later episode in the season.
Okay. You know what? I'm glad that they pick up on this thread again. Even though they really didn't.
They definitely do, I promise.
Did they need to drop it in here? Probably. But you know what? It's funny that you mentioned that because they pick up on this thread later on, which is cool, and I'm excited to see. The other two little threads they pick up on are in Rudy's questions. Like when Rudy says, do you need any undercover help at all? Or could this in any way tangentially be tied to sex bots? Those are references to 2 other episodes. So I guess they were just kind of lacing their episode 2 with things that will come up later.
And oddly enough, the episode 2 we got was sex bots. Yeah. So it's a weird callback to a thing that... I don't know. There's a meta. I'm sure there's somebody with like a yarn wall connecting all of it, you know? I think Richard and Valerie have a very interesting relationship. But if we are to look at this from the perspective of it being episode 2, they were somewhat cold to each other in the pilot.
Right.
And, you know, that is the episode where we get the joke, and it's Valerie who makes the joke about Richard being a prick. and Richard not only is a jerk to Valerie in the first episode, but is also a jerk to Kennex and is just like, I don't think I trust this guy. That Richard makes a lot of sense for an episode 2 here of like almost coming to blows.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. It all tracks. It's just so weird that I'm seeing it again in episode 8 because we've seen 6 episodes of them.
Because it's supposed to be episode 2.
Fine.
I know. This episode is important because it establishes a lot of things, right? Like we even learn conversations from the In-Syndicate, from the In-Syndicate informant, but we learn them so late that we've lost all of the threads that they're talking about. Look, I enjoyed the episode, but you had to not think about it too hard.
Yeah.
And while Danielle and I were trying to come up with an episode-specific thing, what if we just literally talked about how this was supposed to be episode 2? Because all of our qualms with it are because it was supposed to be episode 2.
Right. Yeah, I have to say, this was not my favorite episode of Almost Human. I still enjoyed watching it, but I think I would rate some other ones above this one.
I think so, too. I do think, and again, you know, we keep talking about the like, yeah, you can binge it now. You couldn't binge it then. You know, you had to wait until each episode came out. Do I think it's a strong episode 2?
That's probably why they moved it later in the season.
That's a good point.
Because if it were episode 2, people would stop watching. They'd be like, well, the pilot was messy. And then they would watch the next week and be like, well, this wasn't great. And then they'd stop watching.
I may, for our wrap-up, I may go through the entire series and watch it in its quote-unquote order.
Oh, no.
And see if it makes any more sense.
See if A, it makes more sense, and see if B, you would have continued watching weekly.
Would I have continued watching?
Because
That's a
I am
great question.
pretty sure they put Skin as episode 2 for that reason. They were like, people will keep watching a show if we intro these sex bots right off the bat.
Everybody loves a good sex bot.
Everyone loves a good sex bot. Joy, if you could discuss one more thing about this episode, what would you discuss?
My one more thing is a hovercraft sign. It's so quick. It's so fast. You just see like a shot of a side of a building and it's got a bunch of ads on it, which are obviously like projections. And one of them is for hovercrafts. And I got weirdly excited. I was just like, hovercrafts, they finally did it. It's happened.
I love when shows like this drop things like that. A hovercraft, but Joy, they can go to orbit now. If they can have orbit vacations, it totally makes sense that they have hovercrafts. I love it. I wish we could see the hovercrafts. We see plenty of droids.
I know. Well, I can't remember if we actually see hovercrafts.
Sounds expensive.
Maybe we'll talk about that in our episode 14.
Wasn't there another ad you saw?
There was another ad I saw for sex bots, which was, again, you know, here's your callback to the episode 2, not episode 2. There were a couple other ads, but they were fairly banal.
Mm-hmm. We've already found out about the sex bots, and we know about Rudy going undercover, but the thread that hasn't been unraveled yet is genetically enhanced humans. Can't wait to find out what happens there.
Or the wall.
Or the wall! But you already told me they're not going to talk about the wall.
I know.
So I'm never going to see that little plot thread come to completion. It's just this sad little yarn hanging off of the wall in my closet.
It goes nowhere. It does nothing.
It's just there, all the way through everything.
We're just going to keep referencing it until Danielle loses her mind. Can I tell you? I literally went to the Wikipedia page, typed in search for wall, and they don't even talk about it on the Wikipedia.
Because it's not a part of the plot of the show. And that is so, you know what though? That is solid. This is the thing where in season 1 of the show, I guess it all takes place in the city. And then season 2 or 3 or whatever, they get to expand and reveal what's outside the city and then what's in the galaxy, right? And what they encounter on their orbit vacations. Are there aliens?
These are the other seasons you and I have to theorize.
Well, while they can go into space, they're not necessarily warp capable. So I think that the Federation is just kind of watching them and waiting until these nascent beings are finally able to travel
until these dumbos. That's so true.
Okay,
there's your crossover.
There's your crossover.
They just have to find Zephram Cochrane and they'll be all right.
Well, I'm sure that somewhere in there was a wonderful ending to this podcast episode. So
oh, you know what I forgot to talk about?
What did you forget?
The Howard the Duck gun.
Oh, right.
It's fine. We don't have to.
Are you sure?
I don't think we.
Because we could literally just say there was one more thing we forgot to mention.
That's true.
We have had one more things before.
I have 2 more things. The gun that they shoot this magic bullet with looks, I believe you described it, Danielle, as looking like something that was built out of Kennex.
Oh, yeah. 100%. That's what it looked like to me.
Because once you said Kennex, then I was like, oh, yeah, I 100% see that. But my first thought watching it was, oh, no, it looks like the gun from Howard the Duck. Now, the gun from Howard the Duck, you know, love the movie, hate the movie, did you watch it in a fever dream? That's fine. Let us know in the comments. Howard the Duck is a very, very strange movie. but there is a gun in it that can, like, shoot into space and create a wormhole that aliens can come through on. And that was my first thought when they first fired this gun in, like, an office building on, like, the 15th floor or whatever. I was like, you are going to bring aliens to this district, and this district can't even keep its own nonsense straight.
Joy,
and that was my other one more thing.
Barely capable of traveling to space.
I know! They can't. They cannot do it. Well, listeners, that covers this episode.
We would love to hear from you. Please check us out at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, if you could instantly learn any language in the world, what language would you choose and why? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com.
That's right. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the devices tracking your every move in your life about Binge O'Clock Pod, and we will see you next time.